bring you in particularly on the question about the side, Orientalism, as it were.
Yeah, there were several questions.
Yes, or whatever. There were.
On the cartoons, just read this book, because it's a complicated story. And actually what they went and said was, they said to all members of the Danish Newspapers Illustrators Union, there's a separate union, the Danish Newspaper Illustrators, there are 42 of them, draw me a Prophet Muhammad. And they produced all sorts of them, most of them bad in the sense of just bad cartoons, but they were very diverse. The issue for me is not whether that was a good or bad piece of journalism. The issue is not whether we should publish them or not. The issue is that the intimidation, the threats of murder, the fact that there are 80 people called Kurt Vestergaard in Denmark, which is the name of one of their cartoonists, and all 80, are living under some measure of police protection. That's the issue on the cartoon. On Holocaust denial, I am totally opposed to the criminalization of Holocaust denial. Totally opposed to it. And I think it's a really important point. The double standards point. We cannot say, we defend what is sacred to us, namely the memory of the Holocaust, but it's total free reign, open shooting, on what is most sacred to you. Then we absolutely cannot say that. Either we protect our taboo and you protect yours, or it's free-for-all. I'm for the free-for-all, okay? Within limits. This brings me to the two things. One, anti-terrorist laws, where I agree with you. I basically agree with you. I think they've gone far too far. I think it was absurd myself. I think Douglas might disagree to prosecute the so-called lyrical terrorists. That doesn't fit my bill of genuine incitement to violence, right? So,
but on that point, don't you think, and this is what I'm worried, this is what I'm slightly concerned about this discussion, that the discussion is, and I'm not surprised it came down this way, but the discussion is about Islam, Muslims, religion. The discussion is not about government, state, military, which for me are the much bigger threats. We can talk, I condemn and abhor those of my co-religionists who threaten Danish cartoonists with violence. They need to get a life. And I condemn that mad Somali axeman who broke into the house recently. I remember reading it and thinking, what a nutcase. But, and I'm not apologising here, that is not the same thing as governments across the West, for example, cracking down in all sorts of different ways for example, on free speech. You haven't mentioned at all, Douglas, nobody in the audience mentioned that more people have been killed, more journalists have been killed in the last few years by the United States military than by any radical Muslim in war zones. Journalists have been killed now by armed forces, whether it's Sri Lanka, whether it's Israel, whether it's America. That's a much bigger threat to free speech. Journalists being killed by armed forces of free countries. Believe me, that's a much, much bigger issue, but no one talks about it.
Well, I mentioned that there's something dishonest in this, which is that, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, but the British Army doesn't aim to shoot journalists. And the American Army doesn't seek the death of journalists.
Well, that's debatable.
Well,
when they bomb an Al Jazeera headquarters, they have the coordinates for beforehand twice, and when journalists' unions around the world condemn it, it's very easy for you to laugh it off. Why don't you say that to the wife of the journalist?
Well, I'm perfectly happy to continue discussing this. I'm not speaking to anyone's wife about this. I'm discussing the following point, which is that, as far as I know, it is not British Army policy, maybe, to shoot journalists. What you seem to imply was something quite other than that. Now, people do get killed in war zones, that's true. And no one on this panel is arguing that they should. So I don't...
Well, no one on this panel is arguing cartoonists should be killed either.
But the intention matters. And the intention, when it comes to the people that we're talking about in relation to cartoons, is part of the problem. And not just of the individuals who do it, but and you will not find a cleric, I would imagine, in Britain or America who would approve, for instance, or not fail to condemn such a killing. I think you find it very hard to. It is for some of us about the free speech debate in relation to Islam, one of the most troubling things is not just the very small minority who would carry out acts of violence, but the larger number of people, albeit still a minority maybe, although the majority of certain clerics, who do not go out of their way, as they should, I think, to condemn such behaviour. Can I just pick up on one thing that Timothy said, which is in relation also to the, it comes back to the point about, that was raised about the trickle-down effect of freedom of speech, because somebody mentioned, and maybe mentioned, how this stuff, you know, we talk about this here, I may say something offensive here to Muslims, but how does this feel, as it were, if it trickles down in society, people who will do bad things, they might interpret it as it were, a license to say something horrible and objectionable to a vulnerable Muslim child. The truth is, you cannot police this process. Because once you decide there are things that cannot be said because a thug or an unpleasant person of any variety is going to pick it up and mistreat it, you go in a very bad direction. There are quite enough stupid bigots in the world who are willing to interpret anything as incitement to violence. But do you really want to start saying that our laws on freedom of speech for everyone will be decided by these people? I don't think they can be. And the final thing on this, when it comes to offence and to being offended on this is sadly something we simply have to deal with. Every day in my adult life, I feel offence. I feel offence when I open the Garton. I feel offence when I open the new Statesman. I feel offence when I turn on the television. I feel offence when I walk down the street. I feel offence when I see stupid people. I see offence when I meet very sensitive people. I have all sorts of things, a wide range of things in a day that offend me. But I do not believe that the way to stop that is for me or anyone who agrees with me to legislate that offence away. I said this when I reviewed Kenan Malik's pretty good book on Fatwa to Jihad about this, when a member of the Muslim Council of Britain, Najat Bandawala, said about the Rushdie case. He said, I didn't understand, he said, genuinely, as a teenager in North England, I didn't understand with satanic verses why we were being singled out. And one of the tragedies that came across in that book is that nobody seems to have got it through to Najat Bandawala in the meantime, that the satanic verses was not a singling out of Muslims. It was treating Muslims in exactly the same way as every other group in society are treated, which is to say, you will have, in a free, pluralistic, multicultural society, you will have your opinions trodden upon, including your deepest opinions, on a fairly regular basis.
But if I to offend people on the basis of their race.
I wouldn't like to have laws that stop that. And for the
We do have
let me finish this point. If I may just finish this point, is that we have to be much better in society at explaining also to people who come to our society recently that having the right to be offended is one of the most fundamental rights we have, and that a society in which even your deepest, most deeply held convictions are trodden upon regularly are the only societies worth living in.